Well, good morning. Life is made up of landmark moments, and we all have had them. We will be celebrating graduation soon. That's a landmark moment. Going to college, graduating from college, those are all landmark moments. Marriage, raising a family, all of those bucket list items. One of the things on my bucket list item is to go with Shirley to Scotland. And we had planned to do that last year. So all of these landmark moments, some of them, like my Scotland trip, have been put off because of the pandemic. We all know what that's like. You know, those seniors who had to make different plans than what they had anticipated. Well, one landmark event that I'd like to pick up on this morning is the 30th birthday. On my 30th birthday, I had just become a new father. And now one of my daughters is soon to be reaching that landmark. My oldest daughter already has. But now Laura, who's here with me today, is going to be reaching that pretty soon. And looking at a New York Times article that was published a few years ago, it said that the 20s are often seen as an extended adolescence, as a gateway to the more serious adult world. So you don't really, according to this article, 30 is that benchmark time where you're now deciding that you're going to be an adult. And so they are treating 30, it said, as a bar mitzvah, in a sense, or as a sweet 16. So, have you left the event early to beat the crowds? You're probably 30, right? Or have you purchased recently a t-shirt with no advertising on it? Well, you're probably 30. So these landmark events. So one landmark event we see is in the book of Ezekiel. Let me read to you just the few verses of the opening of the book of Ezekiel. In the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I was among the exiles by the river Chebar, the heavens were opened and I saw visions of God. On the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim. The word of the Lord came to the priest, Ezekiel, son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Chebar. And the hand of the Lord was on him there. Ezekiel's 30th birthday. That's how most will interpret this beginning passage. In the 30th year. And then it gives another day a little later on, in the 5th year of King Jehoiakim's exile. So Ezekiel, because of that, those 2 days, we can pin this down to July 31st, 593 BC. It's a big day, especially for Ezekiel, a landmark day, his 30th year. Well, what does that mean to Ezekiel? In this case, some disappointments. A landmark day, but a landmark loss as well, because Ezekiel has lost his calling. Now we see in those opening verses that he was a priest, son of Buzi. So he was anticipating becoming a priest. And Numbers chapter 4 lists all of those elements of the priesthood, right? And one of them was the age 30. So it would go through every family line of the priesthood, all the clans. And it said when they were 30, they would begin their term as priest. They would be ordained as a priest, and they could begin their occupation that they had anticipated their whole life. Because they were the tribe of Levi, they were anticipated to be priests. So this is a day, a moment, that Ezekiel had been looking for his whole life. His whole life was bent to the age of 30, when he would become a priest like his father and every one of them before him. It was a momentous time. But where was Ezekiel now? He was sitting in Babylon along the river Kidron. Was he going to be ordained there? No. Ordination happened in the temple, previously in the tabernacle. He wasn't going to meet that great expectation he had for his whole life in his 30th year. There would be no celebration, no ceremony of ordination. And what would that mean? If you think about, if I could just take you back to what he would have experienced. Go back to that first ordination of the priesthood, back in Exodus chapter 29, where Aaron and his sons were inducted into the priesthood. His sons were brought before the tabernacle and stood in front of the tabernacle, and they had their investiture. They were vested. They were washed from head to toe to signify a purification, right? And then they would be robed. And of course, Aaron had magnificent robes. But even his sons, the regular priesthood, would be clothed in this fine white linen. And then over that silky linen, they would drape the sashes around them. And then they'd place headdresses on them. And they would be made holy. Even the garments were considered holy. So holy that some of these garments were passed down from generation to generation. So they were washed and robed there in front of the tabernacle. And then they were anointed with oil. And this is no regular, Crisco. This is some special oil that they had to go by. The recipe is actually given to them in the book of Exodus. And it is, made of myrrh and frankincense and all these elements that they put together. And it was so sacred that it could only be used for two purposes, really. One is they used this oil to sanctify and make holy all the furniture of the tabernacle. They would sprinkle it on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. They would sprinkle it on the table of showbread and on the priests. This is an oil that God specifically gave the directions to make and made it unique for this situation. So they would be anointed with oil. And of course, the oil is a symbol of the Spirit of God. And it is a very special thing. So special that I think that it was written about in the book of Psalms. Psalm 133. How very good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity. It is like the precious oil on the head, running down the beard, on the beard of Aaron, running down over the collar of his robes. It is like the dew of Hermon, which falls on the mountains of Zion, for there the Lord ordained his blessing, life forevermore. What a special day that would be, to stand before the temple, clean, robed in special clothing, and anointed with an oil that no one else has really had. And of course, then they had sacrifices. And sacrifices were made again to make this whole setting holy. As there was one type of sacrifice that was made that was restricted only for the ordination of priests. And so it continues. What would that day have been like? The sacrifices sprinkled with the holy oil of God in these sacrifices. But Ezekiel is not going to have any of those tabernacle experiences. He's not going to be able to walk into the temple and stand before that holy place as a priest ordained for the service of God. He's going to be in the river Kidron in Babylon. He's not going to be able to step inside that first tabernacle, later temple, and see that beautiful fabric of purple and blue and scarlet linens, embroidered with cherubim flying about. That will be his experience. He's going to be living and working by the canal. He won't see the lamp. He won't have the opportunity to light the lamps, to do the work of the priest. He's also experienced a significant loss of national and cultural identity. Judah has been squeezed between very powerful political forces. Assyria is now in decline. They had earlier, 150 years before, taken over Israel, the northern tribes, and exiled them. They've been gone 150 years. But now that power is waning, and Babylon is growing from the south. And Egypt, afraid of Babylon, is coming up from the other direction. And so there's great conflict in that area of the world at this time. And Israel, or Judah, is weak. They've had a series of kings after Josiah. Some have only been there a few months, installed one by Egypt, and maybe another is installed by Babylon. And they don't last, and they crumble. And finally, Ezekiel himself, with the king, is taken into exile. And very shortly, only a few years' time from now, will be the final blow when the temple in Jerusalem is destroyed. So they see the success of Babylon, a country that doesn't follow God, being exalted, being made powerful, being great. You're part of a pagan world. Ezekiel is in the midst of a people who don't take their God seriously, who don't take him seriously. It's invisible in a world like that. And I think all of us can relate to the situation we find Ezekiel in. Maybe we haven't met the very great expectations we might have had. Maybe we're sitting now thinking, I could have been. Looking at what we might have lost. Feeling invisible. in a culture that doesn't really care. Well, Ezekiel also experienced loss of a certain confidence, I think, in his religious beliefs. Right? Because after all, God had said, I will always have a son of David on the throne. 2 Samuel 7 tells us that. And yet, what's happened? All the sons of David have been kicked out, killed, exiled. Jerusalem was supposed to be the city of God, the place where God's throne was. Well, that's now under threat. And you were supposed to be living in the land that God had given you. God's land that he gave to you. And where are you? In Babylon. Nothing was right. The world seemed upside down. All your foundations had been rocked. And the result is a group of very sorrowful men. And again, we read about that in the Psalms. That's one of the reasons we have the Psalms, and Psalms speak to us so well. Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, and there we wept. When we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs, and our tormentors asked for mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How could we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Ezekiel was therefore surrounded by sorrowful men with a great question in mind. With all of these momentous things going on, with all of these landmark events being overthrown, who's in charge? Why is all of this happening? Well, there are landmark days, like your 30th. But there are landmark visions as well. And that's one of the things we see in Ezekiel. Now, this section is going to be familiar to many. It's a little long, but let me read a little bit of it anyway. Ezekiel chapter 1, starting in verse 4. As I looked, a stormy wind came out of the north, a great cloud with brightness around it, and fire flashing forth continually. In the middle of the fire, something like gleaming amber. In the middle of it was something like 4 living creatures. This was their appearance. They were of human form. Each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight. The soles of their feet were like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands, and the 4 had their faces and their wings thus. The wings touched one another. Each of them moved straight ahead without turning as they moved. As for the appearance of their faces, the 4 had the face of a human being, the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left side, the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. Their wings were spread out above. Each creature had 2 wings, each of which touched the wing of another, while 2 covered their bodies. Each moved straight ahead wherever the Spirit would go. They went, without turning as they went. In the middle of the living creatures, there was something that looked like burning coals of fire, like torches moving to and fro among the living creatures. The fire was bright, and lightning issued from the fire. The living creatures darted to and fro like a flash of lightning. And as I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the earth beside the living creatures, one for each of the 4 of them. As for the appearance of the wheels, their construction, their appearance was like the gleaming of beryl, and the 4 had the same form, their construction, being something like a wheel within a wheel. When they moved in any of the 4 directions without veering as they moved. Their rims were tall and awesome, where the rims of all four were full of eyes all around. When the living creatures moved, the wheels moved beside them. And when the creatures rose from the earth, the wheels rose. Wherever the Spirit would go, they went. And the wheels rose along with him. For the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. And when they moved, the others moved. And when they stopped, the others stopped. And when they rose from the earth, the wheels rose along with them. For the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Stop there for a moment. Weird, huh? And most people look at that and say, what was he on when he saw this vision? The wheels within the wheels, the storms, the living beings. What is all of this? Well, I just want to say that God will come in unexpected places. Ezekiel is lamenting his 30th year and all that he's lost. And he looks out to the horizon and he sees in the north what looks like a storm coming. Lightning, flashing, cloud, fire. What does that remind you of? Especially in the Old Testament, whenever God appears, right, there's fire and cloud and lightning and thunder and fireworks display par excellence. Here, by the river Chebar in Babylon, God is coming fast to this exiled priest. And he's coming out of the north. That's odd, isn't it? Because if you were thinking of God coming from Jerusalem, that's west. But God is coming from the north, which tells us that God is everywhere. That God is in control of the world. He is not limited to one place. So whether you're in Jerusalem or whether you're in Babylon, God is there. And God is powerful. And God is in control. And God will be the one to answer the question of who's in charge. And he's coming to the exiles. Now the exiles, they didn't have a very grand opinion of themselves, I don't think, nor did the people in Judah. If we would skip ahead in this book to chapter 11, verse 14, it says, "Then the word of the Lord came to me, mortal, your kinfolk, your own kin, your fellow exiles, the whole house of Israel, all of them are those of whom the inhabitants of Jerusalem have said, they have gone far from the Lord. To us this land is given for a possession." So they're saying, God is saying to Ezekiel, now remember, the people back in Jerusalem think that you're under curse as nothing. Now the reverse is going to be true. It's now God is coming, but he's not coming to the people of Jerusalem. Where is he coming? He's coming to the exiles in Babylon, the ones that have been written off, the ones who have experienced such loss. And he's going to appear in unexpected ways, and that's what I really like about this vision. Now remember what Ezekiel has lost. He's lost his opportunity to be a priest in the temple, in the tabernacle. And how does God come to him? God comes to him as a traveling tabernacle. Those living creatures that he talks about, in chapter 10, he comes back to he sees this vision again, and he says, oh, those are the cherubim. I understand now that this vision that I saw by the river Chebar, they were the cherubim. Now, who are cherubim? Cherubim were those angels who stood before God and kept away anything that was unholy. And so on the Ark of the Covenant, you have cherubim that are whose wings arc over the Ark of the Covenant, and their wings touch. And that ark that box becomes, it says, the throne of God, the footstool of God's throne. And so these, and remember, in the tabernacle and in the temple, they had these coverings that were embroidered all around with cherubim. And so here comes God with cloud, because when God inhabited the tabernacle, how did he inhabit it? With cloud. Here comes the cloud, the Spirit of God coming, and he's coming with the cherubim. And the cherubim, God has said in the Old Testament to ride the cherubim. And in one point, they call the cherubim the chariot of God. And so we have what? Wheels, just like the very chariot of God. Here God is moving. He is bringing the whole tabernacle to Ezekiel. And so he has the experience of being before God, surrounded by the cherubim. As he rides it into Babylon. And he gets a brand new calling, not to a priesthood, but to be his prophet, his man among the exiles. And in the same way, this chariot, the cherubim, all of this grand vision, it says it can go anywhere, can move in any direction, just like God can show up in Babylon. It can move according to the Spirit. Wherever the Spirit moved, they moved. And in the same way, we're going to see in the subsequent chapters that Ezekiel is going to be filled with the same Spirit. And he's going to be moved. Just like this grand chariot of God moves at the command of the Spirit. Sure, he's not going to be a priest, but he's going to have a calling that is glorious and being filled by the Spirit. And the last part of this vision is he looks up over the heads of the living creatures, and he sees this dome, and it's glorious. And above the dome, look at verse 26. And above the dome, over their heads, there was something like a throne. And here that Ark of the Covenant in that tabernacle was seen to be the footstool of the throne of God. And so here we have more of that tabernacle. Here's the throne of God, the very throne of God. It's not in Jerusalem. It can't be held just in Jerusalem. It's here at the Kidron River. And God, and he looks up and he sees someone in human form, someone like a human form, sitting on the throne. And in seeing this, he just falls down. He's going to be used mightily by God. He thought his time was over. He thought his landmark moment was gone. And every subsequent landmark moment was tainted. And he was nothing but a captive. Given over as nothing by the captors and by the survivors in Jerusalem. Where was he to go? And then he gets this great vision of what God had intended for him all along. So when you find yourself feeling a bit captive, a bit inhibited in what you really thought you could do for God, and you just can't seem to find that goal, then what we need to do is look to the horizon. Because God isn't limited to one plan. God isn't limited to one place. Maybe you might see on the northern horizon a lot of flashing of light, some cloud, and you're thinking, a storm is coming my way. So God may not be done with you yet. There's a storm coming. Let's be ready. Let's pray together. Lord, we thank you that you're our God and that you know us intimately. We can trust in your care and your guidance. And though we may miss some landmark moments, great things yet appear. The world is charged with the grandeur of God, and it will flame out, and we'll see it wherever we might be. Amen. Shall we? Oh, there we are.